So my name is Echo Yua Yuan. I used to introduce myself as Echo Yuan, but which is something I deeply regret, and I think most people here know why. So, but anyway, since the realization, I start to introduce myself as Echo Yua Yuan because that is my given name. Anyway, so I am social worker trained in Hong Kong, came to the UK many years ago. So, and I practiced in Liverpool as a social worker for about 10 years before starting my academic career. So that is just about me. Okay, so now I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker in the afternoon is Professor Prospera and Tedam. So she's joining us online here. Professor Tandon, she is a professor in social work of University College in Dublin. Her research interests are in the areas of culturally sensitive social work education, anti-oppressive and anti-racist social work practice. I'm sure many of you here probably heard about her Mandela model, which is a reflective framework to enhance learning experience of students, particularly those from Black and minority ethnic communities. Okay. Can people hear me actually? Okay, yeah. In fact, it's important people at the back can hear me. In my teaching of practice education at my university, we often refer to the Mandela model. It's because it's important practice educators are aware of the issues around oppression, discrimination, students from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds may experience when they are during the practice learning. And also, in fact, I also noticed yesterday from LinkedIn, Prospera's second edition of anti-oppressive practice was just launched yesterday. So now I just hand over the time for Prospera for her to talk about anti-oppressive practice in social work education and practice.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It is a bank holiday here in Dublin. It's St. Patrick's Day. It's our very first one, my family and myself. So we are hopefully going out after this contribution to your conference. I'm delighted to have been invited to share some thoughts around how, what an anti-oppressive approach for diaspora and social workers might look like. And I'm going to try and do that by beginning with a short video clip or YouTube clip in a minute. But I just wanted to share before that my relationship with the diaspora or one of the internationally qualified social workers. So it is actually 24 years to this year because it happened in 2000 when I got my equivalency, if you want to call it that, from SETSWA. So in the year 2000, I came to the UK, I applied to SETSWA and I said, here you are, I qualified in Ghana. They said, we've never heard of Ghana, we've never heard of social work in Ghana. What does that look like? So I pride myself in saying, I believe, unless I'm challenged today, I believe that I'm the first Ghanaian trained social worker to have practiced in the UK and to have gotten the registration through SETSWA. And my only reason for saying that is because clearly SETSWA then had to ask me for all the details, which they subsequently then said, this makes it easier for other social work graduates coming from Ghana, that we already have a template that we use with yourself. So that's kind of my association with internationally trained practitioners. But fast forward 24 years, I find myself in Ireland, Republic of Ireland, with yet a different regulatory body called CORU. And I have just started to apply for registration here as a qualified social worker, as you know, to teach social work or to teach some of the courses on a social work program, you need to be registered by that regulatory body. So I have got some experience, and I just wanted to reflect on something that Maya Angelou said in her Passports to Understanding piece in 1993. She said, travel to as many destinations for the sake of education. And I think this is inherently what we're all doing. We are educating and being educated alongside our paths, alongside our movements to different places where we're practicing as social workers. So just briefly, what I want to cover today, because of time constraints, I just want to share a few messages from research. I'd like to introduce the 4D2P model, which is in the book that the second edition, it was in the first edition, it's again in the second edition that came out yesterday, as Eco just told us. And I want to then share some thoughts around allyship and the anti-oppressive approach that I think allyship brings with it. So I'm not going to do this well, but bear with me. I'm just going to show a clip. I'm going to stop sharing this slide and go on to the other screen that I should have open here. So okay, so that's not working. That's a good start. What should I be sharing? It's a YouTube clip. It's open on my computer, but I can't seem to connect it.
What? I think we have the link.
No, we've got the link.
Okay.
Shall we
Yeah.
share it?
That'll be fantastic. Yeah, please share. It's the hidden figures. So I'll just invite you all to look at this 3-minute clip and we will continue the conversations thereafter.
I think just control. Oh, can you just, I think we can just always take control to scale.
Yeah, actually, no.
Yeah, okay, just do that. Yeah, we can just okay. I'm not sure if people at home can see it though.
I don't think.
No, no. No, no, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's the, yeah. Thank you.
Where the hell have you been? Everywhere I look, you're not where I need you to be. It's not my imagination. Now, where the hell do you go every day?
To the bathroom, sir.
To the bathroom. To the damn bathroom. For 40 minutes a day? What are you doing there? We're T-minus 0 here. I put a lot of faith in you.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay colors enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch. So, excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day.
There you have it. No more colored restrooms. No more white restrooms. Just plain old toilets. Go wherever you damn well please. Preferably closer to your desk. Here at NASA, we all pee the same color.
Okay, so thank you very much for that help with that clip. I wanted to start with that clip as basically as a stark reminder about what we have to deal with as people who have come in from a different space where provision hasn't been made for us, where there's no acceptance that we have our own needs, or we have needs that indeed may be different to other people's needs. And for me, that begins the story, that begins a conversation around allyship and what kind of allies we might have in the room here today, and which kind of allies might we have in our places of work, and how we might use allyship and encourage allyship as an anti-oppressive approach. You had to see there, and you know, Kevin Costa had to do something, but he only had to do something because Taraji B. Henderson was able to say what she was experiencing. So just following on from that and hoping that that clip stays in your mind for the next 20 minutes, I'd like us to go through a few slides and then hopefully open the floor for some conversation or at least some contributions. Please do use the chat function as well to drop some of your thoughts around what we've just seen and the conversations that I'm about to have with all of you here today. So we have to think about things like or people like Zora Neale Hurston when we think about where we're coming from and where we want to go. And to start us off, I really love this quote by Zora Neale Hurston, and I think it really covers and touches on what we have just seen, not just in that video clip, but what many of us would have experienced all through our careers in social care, in social work, and the transitions and the difficulties that can bring with those transitions. So Zora Neale Hurston tells us that if you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. Now, it's really deep, and this is not, we don't have sufficient time to really sit and reflect on this and unpick it. But I think this connected with the video clip that I just showed, and in addition to your conference theme today and some of the speakers we've heard already, people who spoke about some of the difficulties with achieving leadership and management in these spaces, people who talked about, you know, how standards and practices might be, or standards might be shown and or taught to people coming into the country. I think we need to begin from the position that we are not going to be silent about the pain, that we are going to indeed talk about some of our experiences, not necessarily with the view of penalising others or making other people look bad, but really from a perspective of, if we want some change, we need to tell people that things that are going on are not good, things that are happening are not good enough for us. So do bear this in mind. If you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So the messages from research then, I think, you know, these are not new. Many of you will have seen and read and indeed written. I've read some of your work, you know, you would have written and talked about some of these. So this is just to give a bit of a context for this afternoon's conversation. And of course, the induction standards that come from yourselves, you know, you estimate that over 10% of England's qualified social workers are trained abroad. So there's a 10% here that we're working with if that's what we want to do today. I know Yohai's in the room as well. Yohai, your work has got particular interest in terms of the connections between work visas that are potentially sometimes tied to employers, which therefore mean that particular social workers in some spaces have had to accept higher workloads compared to their colleagues. Certainly in 2021, I looked at the experiences of Black African social workers during COVID, and I found that you know, COVID exacerbated some of the disproportionate behaviour behaviours and disproportionate outcomes for particular groups of students who are not practitioners, who are not necessarily diaspora or not necessarily trained abroad, but within the wider context of an anti-oppressive workforce, then we're looking at across the range of differences. Jujo, who in 2021 produced a dissertation where he looked specifically at the experiences of Ghanaian trained social workers in child protection in the UK. He talked about some of his, or at least one participant, feeling targeted, labelled and singled out as not good enough as a social worker. And that this particular social worker slash participant was fearful of losing her job, her visa and her livelihood in the UK, and she was then taken through disciplinary processes at her place of work. This left this particular person feeling depressed and frustrated and didn't know what to do, had no one to talk to, and felt that no one was willing to help her, and felt that her world had come to an end. So we're beginning to see some of these pieces of research that I'm citing here. By all means, read up on more. But the connection there where there was no one willing to help, I have no one to talk to. And let's think back to what Zora Neale Hurston said, and let's think back to what Taraji P. Henderson said in that short video clip. Sometimes you have to be asked the question, how are you today? Which will open then up that conversation. Well, things are not great really. But if you're not asked how you're doing, in the instance that we saw in that video clip, she was late coming back to work from the bathroom. That prompted the question. It wasn't the fact that they were asking her how she's doing. You're late back to work. And then she had to explain what her as a Black woman had to go through, finding and sourcing a place to use the bathroom, which was miles away because she was not allowed to use the ones locally or the ones that were closer, in addition to having to make coffee from places and from pots that nobody else would use. And you would see Kevin Costner then taking off the tag that said coloureds only next to that coffee pot. So I know everyone in the room will be familiar with anti-oppression, so the aim here is not to rehearse this or to make anyone feel that I'm teaching them to suck eggs, but we kind of need a context for some of these conversations. And I think that Baines puts it brilliantly when she talks about anti-oppression as being continually redefined, addressing new tensions, new social problems, as well as underlying structural factors. We can all see that there has been a move, a shift, sometimes for the better, sometimes just staying the same, but we begin to see the very different and subtle forms of oppression. And therefore, these new types of oppression make us start thinking about new types of anti-oppression and new ways of defining and redefining what we know to be anti-oppressive practice. And so Baines continues to say that an anti-oppressive approach is a constellation of strategies, theories, and practices that help people understand oppression and how to fight it. Now, I think that those 2 points that I've just made here, whilst really important, well, the second one is not new. The first one I would want us to take note of, that perhaps some of the strategies that we have used in the past may not be working or may not be working as well with the more subtle types of oppression, discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., that we experience as social workers, and that we experience multiply if we've come from the diaspora, if we're from abroad, and we have trained abroad, as we heard some other colleagues mention earlier. So do pardon me, this is not a Prospera wants to tell you all the work that she's done show. This is not what this is meant to be. I was really trying to speak to something that I believe in and something that I have done and I have worked with, and something that I believe is pretty straightforward. People who read my work always tell me it's accessible, and that's the aim of this. Lord knows that English is a second, perhaps third language. So the aim here is not to demonstrate the use of any big words or big themes and words, but the 42P of anti-oppressive practice I developed in 2021. As many of us in the room will remember, how can we forget the gruesome murder of George Floyd, and there's so many other instances of institutional and other forms of racism that existed or that that happened in America and continue to play out in places, including the UK. I was looking for a model that was user-friendly, but I was looking for a model that won't just explain stuff to me, that would actually help me to do things. So I came up with the 4D2P framework, which is what I'm about to discuss, and we'll move that forward. So I'm going to use an example here. When I say that the 4Ds represent discuss, discover, decide, and disrupt, and the 2Ps represent power and privilege. And in this model, what I aim to do is to talk to people about, you know, where do these conversations about oppression, or let's be very specific in the cases that I certainly write about, where do the discussions about racism begin? How do we have them? So if there is a case of racism and anybody, a social worker from the diaspora, for example, is experiencing racism, the first step would be to have a conversation with it. This is a discussion. And as you can see here, don't be silent about that pain. So have the discussion with your line manager, with an ally, with somebody who is listening, and with somebody who's also not using, you know, excuses and tactics such as, oh, I know Jane really well. She's not got a racist bone in her body. You know, we want to talk to people who are there to hear, who are there to listen, and who are there to understand what we're talking about. So the discussion phase, in my mind, is really important. It then follows through that once you've had the discussion, you may, or during the discussion, you may recognize an act or an omission, something that's breached perhaps what we want to call policy or procedure, but we need to name it. We need to discover it and name it. So if it's racism, we need to be saying, I think I experienced racism, or I experienced racism from Joe Blogs, and you know, the reason I say that is because of, you know, they did A, B, and C, which appear to be in breach of this policy or this procedure. So there's a discovery element to the model. And once we've discovered that there is, or there has been, you know, racism, we need to decide what to do or not. It's not always the case that people want to do things. It's not always the case that people want to respond to some of their experiences. But we do know from what we've just seen from Zora Neale Hurston, that if you don't and you're killed, they will say you enjoyed it. So you make a decision about what to do or what not to do. And if there's no further action, and excuse the social work shorthand for NFA, if there's no further action, you can end at the decision to not do anything, and that will be valued. However, if you decide you want to do something, you must ensure that you are disrupting that behavior, that attitude, that experience from ever happening to somebody else. So How tells us quite rightly that what is to be done, so what practice you do in terms of your own social work practice, depends on what you think is going on. So what your decision will be and how you choose to disrupt it will be about what you think has actually happened and gone on. And if you don't name it as racism, as sexism, or indeed, as recently we saw the experiences of Diane Abbott, if you don't name it as, gendered racism, then really and truly at that point, we won't know what to do with it or about it. So once you hit the third D, which is about your decision making, about what to do or what not to do, you have to think about disruption. This is the point that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the models out there do not get to this point. And that was the one thing that I wanted to come out of my new piece of work, which was the disruption of that racism, because that's the example that I've just used. It should be around challenging. We could call people out, or more recently, I've learned that you can call people in, because not everybody feels comfortable with being called out. And some people also think, well, if I'm going to have to call them out, then I won't do anything anyway, because then I will be the target, I will be targeted and so on. So you might want to call people in, which is gently bring people to your side and go, do you know, I'm not really happy with what happened here, there, and we might need to do something about it. So you can do the disruption, or you can disrupt on your own, or with allies, which is kind of where I'm going with the conversation today, and with others. But it is, in my mind, disruption, this fourth D, operationalizes anti-oppression and operationalizes anti-racism, if we're talking about racism specifically. Now, whilst you're going through that process in your 4 Ds, you need to be reflecting on your power and your privilege, the 2 Ps. Now, the power is the ability to influence or make some kind of decision. So if you're the team manager, or you're the service manager, or you're a leader of some description, or you have some knowledge in law, that is your power. what are you going to be able to do in terms of that disruption? How are you going to be able to ensure that other practitioners do not experience what what this person talking to you has experienced? And in the same kind of link to power is privilege. We have earned privilege and unearned privilege. Indeed, when I refer to myself as doctor, I have some earned privilege there. I worked hard for a PhD, but in some spaces that PhD is very quickly erased by my name, the fact that I'm a woman, the fact that I'm a Black woman, and so on and so forth. So I believe that we have earned and unearned privileges in many instances. And where sometimes our identity gives us power, in other places it doesn't give us power, it disempowers us. And so we have to think about the privileges of earned and unearned privileges. And also thinking about, if you're coming from the perspective of an ally, we shouldn't be assuming something is not a problem because it's not a problem for us or for the person speaking. And we have to really think about how we might work against things like institutional and organizational barriers. Now, we know that when people disrupt, sometimes it can take a long time. And I have known of practitioners who have ended up leaving particular local authority jobs because the formal process or complaints procedure, whatever it is, has taken way too long and often feels as though it's going nowhere. So we recognise that there are some difficulties in trying to make that work. And it's really important that we start thinking about how we might do things differently. So the length of time between the discussion and the disruption, like I've said on this slide, can take some time. And we need to see how we might be able to move that around or change it using any power and privilege that we have, or indeed using the 4Ds and getting to the point where you disrupt an organizational or institutional barrier of some sort. Now, this moves us into looking at allyship, because I've looked at, we started with that video clip, and I think that this for me is really important, that we cannot, as diaspora social workers or people who've trained abroad for however many years, as I said to you today, I'm 24 years in the game, but, we haven't done this without allies. We may not have called them that, but we've definitely not done this without allies. And I remember time and time again where, my assessment, which I had written up beautifully, and took to my team manager and went, yeah, here's here's the assessment. Can you cast your eyes over and give me some feedback? And they promptly told me at the time, Prospera, this is not an essay writing competition. This is way too long. I don't have time to look at it. I mean, in a lot of ways, it taught me that I could write long things. So maybe this is the wrong, maybe this is the wrong path of social work. Maybe I should go into writing. So I have to say, 20 odd years later, thank you very much, team manager, for saying that. But at the time, it was said in a way to ridicule me, and colleagues would laugh. Colleagues were, yeah, that's Prospera's assessment. There's like 20 pages for all she needs to do is explain it. All you need to do is summarize. All you need to do is shorten your words. All you need to do is paraphrase. And I'm sitting there writing this, what I think is a masterpiece of an assignment, of an assessment, only to be told and to be made to feel in that way. So I do believe that we have had allies, and we have not necessarily called them that. The ones who've come and said, Prospera, that assessment's great. And actually, in some cases, I had some real thumbs up from judges in court. So for me, I've been quite impressed by that. But we have to think about, the fact that allies themselves need ongoing learning, ongoing growth. Allyship is not a one-off bit of training. It's not a one-off sentiment that, oh, I really do feel for a particular group of people, but that will only pass after this week. We have to think about how we make that an ongoing process, an ongoing learning, and think about allies using their privilege to influence and advocate for fair and inclusive policies, decision-making processes, and a proactive approach that helps to dismantle barriers. So that final D, the disruption phase, very much calls on allies to assist with that. And like I said when I was talking about the 4D2P, that you can draw in allies to help you with the disruption phase. And we have to be really clear that I've put it out there as though this is really easy to do. Yeah, all you do is, you have a discussion. Yeah, you make a discovery, you decide what you want to do, and you go out and disrupt. It's clearly not as easy as that. And some allies along the way will feel unable to do it, will feel that the pace is too fast, the pace is too slow, or will actually realise that this is also detrimental for them. So it is really important for us to think about the context of allies and allyship in this work that we're moving forward. And so brings me to the conversation here I'd mentioned earlier about Diane Abbott and what she's experienced very recently. And, you know, because of the intersectional nature of our identities, really, this is not oppression Olympics. You know, this is not about whose struggle is worse. You know, it is not about that. And Audre Lorde reminds us of that when she tells us there's no hierarchy of oppressions. Therefore, we have to think back, and this is an opportunity on this slide now to reflect on that video clip. I might not be able to provide that time now, but to think about what you saw in that video. To begin with, this was the only Black woman or person of colour in the entire room, the very beginning of the clip. There were white women, didn't really seem to help with the toilet issue, the bathroom issue. There were men, albeit there were no Black men, but there were white men. And you could see from the way in which they were all kind of operating that none of them was going to be an ally. It had to be the boss, quote unquote. So what was happening within that organization that meant that people didn't feel safe enough, or didn't feel the need to, or probably didn't feel that Taraji P. Henderson was saying anything about her pain, and therefore, what's the point of dealing with something that no one's complaining about? What we sometimes forget is that the issue about complaining or speaking up sometimes, and very often for practitioners, is around thinking what might be the repercussions of this open and outward burst of anger and or telling people what's going on. She therefore waited for the right time, but you could see all the emotion that came through. So just thinking there about the intersectionality is really important for the work that we're doing. So as diaspora social workers, or as a group here today, what are the statistics? I'd be interested to find out from some of your ongoing research. Who have you got on board? How many, in terms of gender, in terms of disability, and so on and so forth? Who have you got in your room, and how are those intersectional experiences? How do they play out in individual social workers' lives and roles? So I realise I'm probably slightly shorter time, but I'm coming to the end of this. So some practical suggestions. I've got two slides here, one for diaspora and social workers and one for allies. And just very quickly, diaspora social workers, please identify your allies, but separate them out from your friends. It's very easy to say they're one and the same. They're not. And so let's find out, because some of your friends may not be in your places of work, may not be in these spaces where you most experience discrimination and or negative treatment. So separate them out. Locate and access mentoring and coaching. I think some of this has already been said. Use supervision appropriately. Discuss any issues around fractured belonging. You either belong or you don't belong. There's no kind of halfway house here. But sometimes people make you feel, well, if Jane and Peter are at work today, I feel like I belong. But if they're not here, I don't belong. That's a kind of fractured belonging. So think about issues around fractured belonging in any workspace for you and your colleagues. Engage through volunteering for roles, putting yourselves forward for things that you feel you are qualified for. Yes, you will get some knockbacks occasionally, but somebody's bound to give you that chance to prove yourself. Think about culturally sensitive social work practice. It is an ethical responsibility for all of us. And think about how your team or organisation is on board with this, and how are they being accountable. And I heard somebody mention this earlier as well, maybe not in the same words, but decolonise practice. What models and practice frameworks can you introduce to your team or service that you've brought from your country of origin? I've heard a few words being mentioned here. I've heard Sankofa, which is a Southern Ghanaian term. I'm from Ghana. I've heard Ubuntu. So think about what you might be bringing to that space as a diaspora and social worker. Now, some practical suggestions for allies. Please do amplify these voices of those without your power and privilege. Learn how to listen and accept criticism, even with grace, and because it can be uncomfortable. Think about the 4th D in that model that I just shared, the disrupt. What are your strategies towards disrupting oppression in your team or organisation? And I always say to friends and colleagues, listen, there's no such thing as a safe space when in a team or in any organisation that is actually toxic and unsafe. So, people are talking now about brave spaces. So rather than safe spaces, well, of course, if you've got a safe organisation, you're in good space. But if you've got an unsafe and toxic environment that you work under, there is no safe space there. Walls have ears, and people will eventually find out what's going on and may or may not approve of the ways in which you want to share your experiences with others. And so as an ally, can you contribute to creating a brave space? So just to conclude, what I've tried to do in this model is also to think about existing research and how mine, if you like, or my thoughts, how they fit in or align, or even if they don't align, even if they completely disagree. But I was trying to find some ways of doing this. And Lynch in 2017 did a review of 15 years of anti-racist education in social work and identified 3 important and interconnected aspects of teaching people about anti-oppression. And the first one was to make things visible, make the oppression visible. That's what you do when you have your discussion and you're naming things. When you get to by the time you get to your decision-making stage, you've named it. Recognize personal complicity in oppression through unearned privilege. That's one of your P's. So hopefully that's what I've tried to do there. And the third one, according to Lynch and colleagues, is develop strategies to transform structural inequalities, the strategy. And I think what I've tried to do there, that 4th D, the disruption, for me is the strategy. And that's what I think I have tried to do through using the 4D 2P model. So just before I come off my screen, I think I have gone over time slightly. I do apologise. Thank you very much for having me. I hope this has given us some food for thought for the rest of the conference today. Thank you. And I've got references at the end of this piece. Thank you very much.